Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. With me, I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to take a look at this full moon eclipse that's coming up, on Friday midnight. It'll be 11:55 on the 13th, which is the day before that, but 11:55 p.m. And let's take a look at the chart, and you should be able to see it now. And as usual, we've done this as the natural chart with Aries at the beginning of it, at the first house, and then Taurus going all the way around. This is the actual ascendant for the West Coast, but the ascendant would be different for different time zones, so we like to do it in this way. And I just want to show you a few features of this chart as we start to look at it. And maybe one of the first things you might notice is that Saturn is right next to the Sun. So it's a little bit over a degree between them, but Saturn is definitely emphasized in this full moon, which is an eclipse, which is a lunar eclipse, total lunar eclipse, the moon being very close to the south node, so it's a south node eclipse. And what we've got going, in addition to the presence of Saturn, is we also have, because of the degree of Uranus in Taurus at 24 degrees, just a little bit like, we're talking about 5 minutes of a degree different from the moon or the sun, the trine from the moon, the sextile from the sun. We have Uranus once again pretty strongly emphasized in this full moon. And you might recall, we did have in the previous full moons from the last few months, Uranus also. And it was a T-square last time, and this time it's a trine rather than a square, so it's a little bit milder perhaps in the way it comes in. But so far, we have Saturn and we have Uranus, and they're quite different, as you know. We also have a strong presence of Neptune. Now, why do I say that? Neptune is actually quite close to the north node of the moon, which is where the eclipse is located. So we have that going on, but we also have the fact that if we right-click in the time passages software, you can see the parallels. And the actual fact of the matter is that Neptune is parallel to the Sun and parallel with Eris as well. So that brings it a little closer in. And we would say that this has not only Neptune and Saturn and Uranus, but we could also say Pluto as well. Pluto is parallel, contraparallel to Jupiter. And it's located in the early degrees of Aquarius still, so it's powerful in Aquarius because the early degrees are important. It's also quite close in the square that I keep talking about between Pluto and Haumea. Haumea is getting close to the 3 degree, well, it's moving backward, but it's very close, 10 minutes away from 3 degrees. And we have also Pluto at 3 degrees of Aquarius, so that's a perfect square there. And we do want to just bring this in. We want to also consider the fact that Pluto is a septile with the Sun in this arrangement. You can see down there in this area here, which is kind of the place where we show these things. When you can put the mouse on anything, you can look and see what you're looking at. You can click and get an interpretation, and we see that this septile between the Sun and Pluto is less than a degree. And if we single click on that, we'll see that just means that Pluto is connected to the Sun. For septile, we can say the planetary energies darkly interact, inclined to occult dimensions, not the normal way of doing things. So septile is an unusual aspect. It is a seventh of the circle of 360, and so it's actually 26 degrees 51 minutes. So it's not a rational number. So it's kind of a strange aspect, and the fact that Pluto is involved is a little strange. So Pluto with the Sun and a septile like that square as well to the position of Haumea. So the Pluto-Haumea square is alive and well in this particular chart, and it brings in really all the outer planets. We do have, now our total comes to, we have Saturn, we have Uranus, we do have Neptune and Pluto. And of course, there's actually a sextile also between the position of this, Neptune is very close to the 0 degree Aries point. And so that's a sextile as well to Pluto. So these things are all powerful, including we have the presence as well in this full moon configuration of Eris in Aries, still pretty close to Chiron, so it brings Chiron as well. And we have the Venus retrograde. And what do we have as far as Mercury? Mercury is standing dead still in the sky at 9 degrees and a half. It'll get to, it's 9 degrees Aries 31 minutes. It'll get to 9 degrees Aries 35 minutes. So, and then turn around, and that's 24 hours after this midnight of the 14th. So it'll be about midnight of the 15th on the West Coast. A little, an hour later each time zone you cross. So basically early morning hours of the 14th for this full moon, and of the 15th for the actual retrograde of Mercury. And then both Mercury and Venus will be retrograde, moving backwards through the sign of Aries. They will exit Aries just about around the end of the month. And then it will be April 7th actually, when Mercury turns direct. Well, let's see what it says here. If we right-click on it, it is the 7th. Okay, yeah, so it's the 7th of April that Mercury finally stations to direct motion, but it's going to be all the way back here at the very tail end of Pisces by the time it does that. So what have we got going here? We have a double retrograde of inner planets through the early degrees of Aries, crossing the Aries point back into Pisces to meet Saturn there, which will be around 25 degrees of Pisces. So will they as they turn around. So we have this triple conjunction. Mercury never quite catches up to Venus, but we have a triple conjunction in early April with Saturn and with the stationing to direct motion of both Mercury and Venus. So it's a pretty wild ride because of all these outer planet connections. And we are being tested and tried in various ways in our personal lives, in our life of our collective, especially in the United States. We can see big changes. We can see the threat of more changes. We can see the attempt to maybe moderate the changes. All that is going on. So what does it mean for each of us personally? We have a lot of choices. And we have a lot of considerations. We have outer planet coming in, which really, all of them really imply transformation, especially Pluto and Neptune. This is wherever the Aquarius sign is in your chart is being transformed right now. For Aquarians, it's very key. It means there's an identity shift that's going on. They're finding out a little bit more about who they really are. They're moving to a new stage of their evolutionary path of development, because we're always changing. Bob Dylan said it very, very much the best, perhaps. What Bob Dylan said was that anybody not being born, anybody not busy being born is busy dying. And I think that's a great thing, that life has changed, life is flux, and we're always going somewhere. We may not be going where we want to go, we may not be going where we think we're going, but we're going somewhere, and it's good to try to pay attention to that, pay attention to what's up for us internally as we go through. So with these outer planets, we can add that with Uranus, with Uranus being so configured in this full moon configuration, we could expect to find enlightenment from the strangest of places. It's not the ordinary everyday. It is a kind of a left turn from that. It's recognizing that we are multidimensional beings. We have the non-rational as well as the rational side of things, which all these outer planets bring much more closely to our attention. Of course, Neptune is famous for that, right? It doesn't go with this physical world. It goes more with the world beyond the physical, which is very real. So what we have in this life is we have things that we can consciously understand. We have our rational side of everything, but we also, let's face it, have the beyond, the non-physical, departed spirits perhaps, other entities perhaps, intuitional spaces where we can learn things without really understanding consciously how we did it. We just get a flash of it, the vibes, right? So all of that is very real and very important for us to just recognize that, kindness counts. There's more than one way to do things. The way we treat each other really matters. It matters in the grand scheme of things. It matters in our individual lives. It ripples out from our actions, our everyday actions. So all these things are very important, very up for us, kind of a dicey time, kind of a crazy time, kind of we don't know what's happening next, But whatever it is, we just got to make the best of it. And, it's really best if we can just come to this place of understanding that things happen for a multitude of reasons. Things happen for a purpose. And the thing that seems like the most dire circumstance can later on, when we look back on it, seem like the greatest lesson. So we just have to keep all those things in mind. There is the contraction of Saturn that we'll be dealing with. We will find things are not easy to do, especially with the retrogrades of your inner planets, both Mercury and now Mercury and Venus being retrograde. So things come to a standstill to some extent, and this will be for the rest of the month. It'll be possibly as long as several months, because eclipses are said to last for 6 months, until the next eclipse season. So that is something to think about as well, that this is kind of where we're at as far as what we're looking at here. This configuration, this is kind of where we're at for a while, for the summer. So it's good to remember that too. And in this summer, of course, the other thing to keep in track of is that Neptune will cross into Aries. Saturn will join Neptune in Aries almost exactly. It doesn't quite catch up. But we'll have a very strong Saturn-Neptune, which means the antithetical idea of what is in the physical, what's with the physical, and also what's beyond the physical, so that it can pull in both directions. We can have a more practical attitude towards what's beyond with Saturn, but we can also have a kind of a spacey attitude toward what is in the physical, and everything is not what it seems. The deception, self-deception, aggrandizement, images, fantasies, ideas, all of that is coming up this summer, when we'll have this very interesting configuration, because Uranus crosses in to Gemini, being therefore trine to Pluto. So we have a Uranus-Pluto trine with Neptune at the midpoint in 0 Aries. So it's pretty dramatic. It doesn't last the whole year. It lasts through the summer. And then in the fall, these things go back. Neptune goes back into Pisces. Of course, Pluto doesn't go back. Pluto stays in Aquarius, but Uranus goes back again into Taurus. So, it kind of calms down, or we get to see the lessons of it. But this is a very dicey time. It's not until May that we can really escape the retrograde shadow of Mercury, because Mercury doesn't get caught up to this point of 9 degrees 31 minutes or 35 minutes. It doesn't get caught up to that until April 26th. So May is a time also of kind of recovering from the double retrogrades of Venus and Mercury. And every month that comes along until September, October is actually kind of a challenge. So it's a challenging time. And we'll want to think about the fact also, of course, that Mercury rules Virgo, and Virgo is the place where we have this full moon eclipse that is kind of dramatic here, and Mercury is going backwards in Aries. By the way, I wanted to show you also the equinox chart. As we look into these things a little bit further, we'll be thinking about the fact that coming up in another week, is the spring equinox, or it's better calling it the Aries equinox, because south of the equator it won't be spring, of course. It'll be fall. And we have, just to show you, we have quite a lineup in the second house. Now, this is cast for Washington, D.C. So quite a lineup in the second house, which is material resources. And so, they're talking about the economy being on the fritz, all the uncertainty with the tariffs and no tariffs, no tariffs. And we have an interesting factor in the fact that of course, the sun is just entering into Aries. So this is the sun at 0 degrees Aries. So we cast the chart for that moment. and this is the ascendant in the East Coast, Washington, D.C., and the moon is in the 10th house, and the moon is actually making a trine to these retrograde planets of Mercury and also of Venus, with 6 degrees being right in the middle of this, you see. So I think it's a very strong equinox chart, which we use to kind of predict the year ahead. It's another way of looking at things, and we will want to look at this, for example, close square between Pluto and Haumea, which I always associate with the truth coming out. You know, it's like Haumea has a lot to do with truth-telling. It's connection to nature, connection also to an inner moral compass that has to do with kindness, being kind to each other, being the golden rule, treat people the way you would like to be treated. And with Pluto square, and emphasized, you see, in all these different configurations, somewhat emphasized, we do have, Pluto is at the midpoint of that trine that we're talking about between the moon and also the retrogrades of Mercury and Venus. What we have with this square is I think we have occasions to really, really value the truth-telling element within us. And what happens is the lies that are told, because politicians lie. Politicians mostly lie somewhat, and sometimes they lie quite a lot, as we're finding out. And so those falsehoods, when they catch up to somebody that's in high positions, let's say, it can be very revealing, and it can be a big shift in the way people think about everything. So there could be a lot of political shifts going on this year, a lot of occasions for trying to get to the truth of the matter. The discernment is really important. There's all kinds of stories. We have different stories being expressed by different parts of the social media, which is becoming so embedded in our society. So this is all very cosmic stuff, very keen stuff to recognize that these things are happening to kind of expose the situation that was there all along, that we were kind of letting it go, but now it's really kind of in our face and we're having to deal with it. So I think that's a bit of what's going on this year. So back to the full moon eclipse chart, just to say that we do have quite a chart here and quite a ride coming up these next few months. And that it's just good to recognize that and to also be prepared for what that might mean for each one of us individually. And remember, just keep our heads on straight. And if you can be, that's where also Eris comes in, because Eris, feminine warrior for soul intention, is really to find out what your bottom line is, what your deepest values are that you can really relate to, and stick with that. Stick with what you know, what you believe, in spite of all the winds of change that are blowing around you. And therefore, you can be free. You can just say, well, this is where I stand. And that's that. And I can fight for it if I need to. I can certainly articulate it. And I don't have to kind of be prey to all these forces beyond our control, because you really you always have what you stand for. There's a very famous kind of parable story of a warlord in ancient Asia that rode into town, and they were destroying all the monasteries because they were against those. And they informed this leader, this king riding into town on his big horse, that one of the monks did not flee. And he was incensed with rage, and he said, why would the monk not flee? And so he charged ahead to back to the monastery, up on the hill, to find out what was going on, jumps off his horse, strides into the courtyard, pulls out his sword, and he says to the monk standing there, don't you know who I am? I could run this sword through your belly and not blink an eye. And so the monk replied, and the monk said, but do you know who I am? You could run your sword through my belly and I would not blink an eye. So that's the thing, to be powerful, to be content in yourself, to know where you stand. And really that's kind of all you need in a certain way. So let's transition back here. I just want to say, as I always do, to keep the faith. The fact that astrology works is a miracle. It doesn't make sense. This is where it goes to the mystical, beyond what makes sense. And when we recognize that the universe is always surrounding us in a certain way and that it makes its own sense in a certain way, we can feel, I think, a little above the fray, a little independent of all the forces that seem to be blowing around us. We can stand strong in ourselves and just say, no matter what, this is where I stand. All right. Talk soon. Best of luck with all that, and take care.